Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming along again to the third in this series of 4 webinars. This has proven by far to be the most popular, which I'm not saying I'm surprised it's very popular, but the other two were more popular than I expected, and this one's just gone mad. So I suspect that a lot of the questions and the commentary from Amy and Ben are very appropriate because of the sheer enthusiasm for this. A very bit piece of background from me on each of the presenters today, but before I do, just to make sure we understand how we're going to operate this, at the bottom of your screen you'll see a Q&A button. If you have any questions, please throw a question there, and we'll either deal with it at the next gap or I might park it towards the end of the presentation. We've got 90 minutes here. I will warn you in advance, I'm in a part of Australia, albeit a large town in a very popular area that has dubious reception. So if I suddenly vanish into a black void, Amy and Ben will just pick up control. My apologies for that. It will be something completely out of my control. So our 2 presenters today. First of all, I will talk very briefly about Amy. Amy's been working in this bid space for longer than she would like me to talk about, but let's just say it's around 15 years. And currently working with Julian Midwinter and Associates, where they operate on a 4 out of 5 success rate for bids. And in my experience in professional services, that is a very high rate. So I'm keen to hear some of the ideas and insights from Amy. Amy will speak second, but first, before we get into it, I'll introduce Ben. Ben and I have worked together for a number of years. I felt I should get to know Ben better because he's the only West Ham fan that I know. And he's had a good morning so far. They managed to beat the 7th rate team. Ben and I have worked closely on the business of trust for probably about 6-8 years now. We first bumped into each other when he was with a client, and then he moved into working with me in New Zealand, or large in professional services while I've known Ben, and is now running his own business called the BD Ladder, and that's where this kind of kicks off. So I will go quiet now. I'll throw in some stories and anecdotes where I think it's relevant, and I will manage the questions as you throw them in. Over to you, Ben.
Thank you, Keith. Really looking forward to today, looking at bids in the new normal and how that's going to pan out. So today we'll be covering lots of areas, and there's already been lots of questions come in, which is great ahead of time. We'll look at how you actually position and get ready in a digital age where contact with clients can be slightly difficult, how you get ready ahead of time. We'll be looking a lot at whether people are just going to bid for everything, and discounts will come into the conversation. We'll also be covering off how you can position yourself for government work. Obviously, with government contracts now, that's much more appealing to people. You know you'll get paid. We're also seeing here over in New Zealand things like shovel-ready projects coming to market. While there's a delay at the moment due to an election, we are seeing a trend not just here but globally where governments will be spending money, particularly on infrastructure to try and buy our way out the economy a little bit. So we'll be covering off that, and we'll be covering off that how you can actually try and turn what looks like a desperate situation and how you can potentially position better out of a bid that you're going for you have little chance of winning. And of course we'll be touching on discounts and those who are also looking to buy work, and that's obviously an issue that will be more and more prevalent in the current market. What I would say, linking back to Colin Jasper's session that we had very early on in this, there was some really interesting research from the Buyers Legal Council that basically said that around about 50% of buyers of legal services, and you can extrapolate that out to all services, I would say, particularly professional services, about 50% are looking to renegotiate with their firms and suppliers. So from the buying side, we will see more of these RFPs coming into the market in the next 6 to 8 months. Amy, over to you.
Yep. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Keith. Yes, so the new normal, and I think that is all yet still to play out, and we're probably all a bit sick of the term, the new normal. So yeah, picking up from what you were just saying then, Ben, we've noticed an uptick in what I'd call mini requests for information rather than full RFPs. So things to shore up contract arrangements, perhaps update things like data security policies, reconfirm pricing arrangements, particularly for panel tenders, where because there's a bit of a wait and see as to how the pandemic's going to continue to play out in various regions, that they won't be moving to the full tender, but they do need to lock in supply chain or expert professional services for the next 3 years, say. So I think another key thing that's happened since the beginning of the year, particularly with professional services, BD and bid teams, is there've been quite a few redundancies with some of the bigger firms, which has put extra pressure on BD and marketing teams looking at supporting their firms in responding to bids. So that's something we can get into in the discussion today about how you can be better prepared, and if there are a lot of bids on, what are some efficient ways to run them, particularly remotely? Okay. Did we want to go into the first poll?
Yes.
Yes. All right. So we have a few polls throughout the webinar today. So the first one, we're keen to hear from everyone, which of the following things have already had or will potentially have the biggest impact on your chances of winning a bid? And I might ask if Keith's able to launch the poll.
Yeah, so I'll launch the poll, and on this one you only get one. I know you can answer as many of these as you like. Off you go. These should appear on your screens.
Yeah, so the 5 options here are things that Ben and I and Keith have noticed already happening in the last 6 months or so across professional services firms. So I think, these will tend to be your bigger challenges.
Okay, it's looking fairly. Oh no, we're starting to get a trend at the first 3.
Yeah.
And the last of those 3 is one that Amy just referred to, which is the lack of internal resources. Okay, so yeah, it's the. Just give another couple of seconds. We've got there's still some coming in. Okay, so the 3 that are by far the biggest are the chasing RFPs, not being able to get in front of the clients ahead of time, and also the lack of internal resources. So if I end that and share the results with everybody, and then over to you, go again.
Yep, I think that segues quite nicely, that one about not being able to get in front of clients ahead of the RFP release. Due to the social distancing and other restrictions since COVID's hit, which brings us into our first topic. How do you position for a bid during a pandemic?
I think in the modern world, more people are now aware of social media and the importance of social selling, and particularly LinkedIn and how that works, and sharing content ahead of time. It's really key that if you're going to position for a certain sector or a certain opportunity that you know that's coming up and you're struggling to get in front of your clients, one of the first things you need to do is actually write some good content and share stuff that shows you understand the issues and challenges they're facing, and get that out into market in a good way. In previous firms I've worked with, you can actually use LinkedIn quite cleverly. You can take that piece of thought leadership and you can actually sponsor it to make sure that those organizations and those people within those organizations that you want to see it, it will appear in their feed. Now, you can't guarantee they'll click on it, but you can actually make them aware that you're in that space and that you're active. So you can actually use LinkedIn in a proactive way to have those conversations. The other part is, of course, don't wait. You can actually have conversations with your clients now. It doesn't have to all be online or digital. Just because you can't have a coffee catch up, you can still go and meet with those people ahead of bids coming out. The sooner you do it, the better. You won't get locked down in the probity wall. So finding things of value to take to them and talk to them is really your key to driving those interactions, having success. But work with your marketing team as well as your BD teams to actually think about what you can do to pre-position and let the market know that you're playing in this space and that you have the credibility.
Yep. And I think that's right, Ben, picking up what you said about having something valuable to take to people, whether that's a little tool or a checklist, not just a lame, oh, I'd like to get to know more about your business. It's got to actually be something that's worth their time and will hopefully pique their interest, and do all of the work to help pre-position you as an expert, raise your profile. And the beauty of developing a tool or a white paper, a piece of thought leadership, is that you can leverage and amplify it to signal boost, all the other things you're doing. So it's not just a one-shot thing. I think, as we like to say, that business development, it's not a one-off event. It's actually a process, and it's having that discipline and consistency around your digital presence and outreach, if you're going to interact on things like LinkedIn, etc., and just chipping away at it each week so that you are top of mind, because you never know who's looking and when they're looking.
Can I throw, I guess, a comment and a question to both of you? The comment is, I'm still staggered at how few professional services firms in particular actually have a social media strategy. And as I've mentioned many times, any of you who know me know that it's not my strongest point. But if you do not have a social media strategy in this, which is clearly a digital world now, then you need to get one. And in 2 weeks, Catherine is doing a whole one of these webinars around that subject. So if you don't have one, you're not sure about it, I would strongly suggest you attend that. But the resistance seems to be, and I think this is one of the big differences if you go back to when I was young, and obviously that's a very long time ago, growing up in the Coopers and Librands of the world, thought leadership was me getting on stage with something I had written that showed I was a genius. Thought leadership now has fundamentally changed, and it's almost like the collective knowledge within your business. So it's not just the individual, but the only way you get to the collective knowledge is by all the pieces of individuals. But it's not just your own knowledge. And picking on what Ben and Amy were saying there, you've got to clearly show who you want to target. This isn't just about broad brush marketing. You need to know who you're targeting. You need to be very clear on that. But you can also share third-party information. And the way LinkedIn is set up, unless you're prepared to pay for it, you will get more success by sharing third-party intelligence on the subject matter you think your client might be interested in than by your own. That's just the way it works. So that's kind of an observation. The question to Ben and Amy, I have noticed absolutely no reason over the last, 6-7 months now, I've never yet experienced a client or a potential client who doesn't want to talk to me just because we're now working on Zoom. I just haven't come across it. I've seen zero change in that.
Correct.
But I'm working 99% in the private sector.
Yeah.
And as long as my client knows I'm going to give them value for that conversation, this isn't a pitch conversation, as any of you who know me know. It's a conversation where the other person on the call is going to get some value. I've seen no change. Have you guys seen any change in the public sector on appetite for conversations where they receive value? Before a bid comes out, this is just general relationship, value-adding conversations. I just don't know because I've not been in that space.
Yeah, look, I know some of the law firms I work with are certainly still able to do a certain amount of face-to-face things, which includes things that they have regularly scheduled on-site sessional advice clinics with clients, and they seem to still be happening in person on site with appropriate distancing. The other thing, harking back to what we were touching on earlier, I think with things like Zoom, Microsoft Teams and other video conferencing tools, a lot of people are pleasantly surprised at just how well it has sort of worked and how quickly they've been able to bite the bullet and actually get all of those things up and running. It's still not as nice as being face-to-face,
No.
but yeah, I think having the face-to-face through video is better than nothing.
I think,
and you can kind of look each other in the eye. So I think it is somewhat business as usual, but it also depends where you're based as well.
there was an interesting take on it, and someone's actually brought in NZTA here. In Auckland, we went back into a lockdown for a very short period, but a second lockdown. What I saw in my own diary, and actually those I work with, some of those meetings just got put back because actually people were a little bit over Zoom, would rather wait a week to have that meeting, knowing that you're going to be able to have that meeting in a week's time. So it did have a slowdown in business, and then people thought for that 2 weeks they'd work in their business and then do their external meeting. So if you do yo-yo and go back into a second lockdown, don't be surprised if you see that some of those meetings get postponed if it's a short period of time.
Yeah, so I'm not hearing that there's any significant difference. We can all understand that it's better. Well, some of us understand it's better to be face to face, in person as opposed to on technology. But my experience is if your reputation with your clients and with prospects is one that is worth spending time with you on a call because they'll get some value, the client doesn't care whether it's via a screen or not. Yes, okay, people zoomed out and all that stuff. But if they see that they know that they're going to get value from Ben, they'll get on the Zoom call. And so to me, it isn't so much about the digital disruption of COVID, i.e. through technology. It's about the need to focus on what is going to happen in that conversation has probably been exacerbated by technology. Yeah, and that for me is the key thing. And Michael's just made a comment that some of you will have seen here around, yes, it does, but it does depend on what's happening in the class world. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But that to me is no different as to whether it's in technology or not. You need to understand the client's world, what's going on, is it appropriate, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, so sorry, I just thought I don't want people to be able to believe that they can, what's the most appropriate way of putting this? That we can't meet in person is the reason for not having a conversation.
Yeah.
But Keith, I think bigger to that, I think whether you're messaging your client, emailing your client, sharing piece of information, or having a conversation, or even a 5-minute, 10-minute phone call, the fact that you're still having interaction and providing value and understanding and learning more about them positions you well for the bid coming up. If you sit there waiting, excusing yourself and sitting and saying, well, I can't contact them, so I won't contact them, it will just get worse. And no magic trick in the world, however good someone like Amy is at writing bids, you can't turn it around if you haven't done any pre-positioning.
That's right. And I think that's sort of a bigger pre-existing cultural problem that some senior professionals may have. It's that reticence about picking up the phone and then wanting to, perhaps present just on paper and hope that they'll get a call. And, a lot of them are basically frightened of talking to clients, and they shouldn't be. So that was maybe a cultural issue that existed beforehand.
Exactly. Okay.
Yep. Okay.
So I think one of the points here about that also, and I know it will come out in here, is actually make sure your LinkedIn profile is up to date and you look good. Your clients will be looking at that. Government, when they're looking ahead of time, will actually start looking at organisations and people's profiles to see what they're at. And if you haven't put yourself in the best light and done the basics on that, it's not going to show up well. And if it's inconsistent with what you're going to put forward in your bid, you'll get found out.
Yes.
And Amy, there's lots of good examples about how this actually comes in.
Yeah, I think we first noticed this trend probably in 2017, and I was a little taken aback. But then when I thought on it more, I realised why they might be doing it. A big insurer asked not only for profiles of the professionals being put forward as the service team for the bid, but links to each individual's LinkedIn profile, which created a lot of consternation and, for some segments of this firm, a lot of extra work, because a lot of the partners and younger professionals if they had a LinkedIn presence, they treated it almost like it was just a copy of their CV. which originally LinkedIn was more like that, but now it's more of a selling tool. And I think the reason we've noticed in certain RFT&Ps that we're being asked to provide LinkedIn details is because on paper, in the universe of a specific bid, you can gussy up and dress up people to look like experts in a certain sector or skill set, whereas LinkedIn is your public profile in addition to your web profile, perhaps on your firm's website. So I think that's a further way for them to verify, is this professional who they say they are? Are they really a specialist in this, or are they just saying that on this occasion? What do they tell others? And I think one of the other reasons for some consumers of professional services that they may want to see your LinkedIn is perhaps there's a little bit of what I like to call light stalking going on, where they may be looking to see who you're networked with, who your connections are, and if that's potentially useful to them somehow in their business for whatever that is worth to their decision making. I don't think it would lose you the bid, but it is, as we were saying, it's another thing to be aware of. And perhaps if you are about to put in a bid for a big RFP, you should do a bit of an audit of LinkedIn and just make sure that it's reflecting, what it is you do and who you do it for appropriately, so it's appealing to your target clients.
No, absolutely, Amy. And I think there's two other points to that, which is when people say they're active in an industry, if you can, when you look at someone's profile, you see they're commenting on posts and commenting in industry forums and groups, you can actually see they're active. The other part is there's a bit down the bottom of most people's profile that has references.
Yes.
Actually, if your current clients are saying nice things about you and giving you good reviews, suddenly you become credible, because we all buy from people when they've got good references and we know that their clients value the work they do. So you're further along that buying cycle. And I suspect they're actually looking for that part of it. Has this person got good references? Are they trusted by their clients? Do they do good work? So it's really important to get that up and running.
Yep. And again, it's just another touch point. If people are looking, evaluators or prospective clients are looking to verify information about you, it's a further little tick along the way to saying yes and winning that bid.
Can I just pick up a question that's been posted? I'll handle it quickly because I go on about this for days. By someone called Anonymous Attendee. So basically, I hear what you're saying about contact, but if you know no work is coming out, and you also know that your competitors are so hungry and have heard that the client is sick of hi, how are you checking calls, couldn't you be doing more relationship damage by annoying them? And wouldn't the best strategy be more LinkedIn blogs, building a brand, monitoring the situation, etc., etc.? Yes and no, and I'll just handle this one before we move on. Yes, absolutely. As the guys have been saying, do more of the LinkedIn stuff. That is appropriate. But I just want to be clear when I'm saying about talking to your clients and prospects, they are not just how are you checking calls. I think that was a very good thing. Or that was part of the conversation we were having back in March when COVID first started hitting most places. But what I'm talking about is very different. And I won't go into it here because that's the subject of a million webinars that I've got. But making damn sure that when that client receives the invitation for a conversation, the invitation compels them to think, I would be stupid not to take that call. And then in the call itself is making damn sure by the end of that call, the person you can speak to is thinking to themselves, that is the most useful 30 minutes I've had this week. So these are not just check-in calls. And if you want to know more about that, I think if you go to, when we send the recording out to this, there's a whole bunch of webinars in that recording on that page. And there's a lot more information about what I mean by that there. So absolutely, don't just call for a chat and check how they are, because you will get nothing. Absolutely.
Very good. Okay. Winning with government. So I might kick off this section. So as we touched on at the top of the webinar, at present, government is looking increasingly attractive to a number of providers because they globally are keen to keep stimulating economies and buying all kinds of things. So Ben mentioned in New Zealand at the moment, there's a lot of infrastructure, shovel-ready type projects on the go or, imminent. And this is a slightly older stat, but the text down the bottom, $64.5 billion worth of contracts in that 2018 to 19 financial year. So overall, governments globally are the biggest procurement marketplace, and they are attractive clients. They're prestigious, but also once you're onboarded, and if it's, say, a panel appointment where you are locked in for perhaps at least 3 years with options to renew, there's usually no write-offs. So they're a good client to have. You do need to obviously have the art of navigating a hierarchical organisation down pat. But yeah, they can be very, very good to have as clients. Did you want to add anything there, Ben?
Yeah, just one interesting part about it, and it's certainly true in New Zealand, and I think around the rest of the world, it's actually one of the more expensive contracting processes, usually government. They're quite time consuming, they take a long time. So actually your cost of sale is quite high.
Yes. And I think we've noticed they've become more sophisticated as consumers. So I think we talked earlier, Ben, offline about how a few years back, the Australian government started doing whole of government procurement exercises where the idea is they use their buying power to create sort of what they called multi-use lists. In that situation about a decade ago, basically, if your firm could comply with the requirements, you got a berth on the panel. Yeah. And some of the lists or panels, they ended up with over 150 providers around Australia. And it turned out when the reporting came out, because being government, they report on their spend, external spend on services, about less than 20 providers were actually getting any substantial work. They've since redone that particular process and put more emphasis on value for money. So not only did you need to comply with the threshold issues like having enough insurance in place, etc., but also demonstrate how you added value in excess of your professional fees, if you like. So they've become much more informed as purchasers of services. So sometimes the bids now are quite onerous.
Yeah, we've seen a trend here in New Zealand. There's two things that, obviously never celebrate when you get on a panel, because that's not the time to pop the champagne. That's the time when you really have to start work and building relationships and trying to see what's coming up next and pre-positioning, because you haven't won anything at all yet.
That's
the
right.
other one we're actually seeing quite often in certain panel arrangements, people off panel have won work by coming in, actually doing the hard work off the panel and actually creating a tender and actually then winning it. So just because you're on a panel, you spent that time investing, you really need to think about the competition and still do that stuff and be less complacent.
That's it. And really getting the bid together and then hopefully succeeding, that's really the first toeholds on what is a journey to build that relationship with the client. And then
I was staggered when I started working with more and more, it was probably law firms in Australia. The celebration that happened when you got on the panel, and then people would almost literally sit back and watch the phone and wait for it to ring.
Yeah.
Yes.
Believing that they get their 1/5 share if there were 5 on the panel. And I think it's a nice, easy thing to hide behind. And then you can probably put something in your pipeline tool as well, saying we'll probably get 1/5.
Yeah.
And so all the measures tick.
Yeah.
Just for some of you who haven't worked with me before, if we're working with an organisation who are on a panel, and let's say there's the 5 on the panel, so they expect to get their 20%. I would always say you're only successful if your success rate is double your share. So 5 on the panel, you should be getting 40%. If you're not getting 40%, you're not trying hard enough. And it's amazing how if you actually then apply all the things that we're talking about, how that 40% actually, in not all cases, some cases it won't happen, but in enough cases to justify it, gets hit pretty quickly. But that's again not by, it's about doing everything that we're talking about today earlier.
Yes.
The other thing about off-panel that I find really interesting is, and it's usually a fight I have with 1 or 2 people in a room where they're talking about government particularly. And the time it usually happens is where someone in the non-panel entity has got a relationship with someone very high in government.
Yes.
And again, this is the point about don't just deal with the technical buyers who are issuing this at the procurement function. You have to build this relationship way early with someone at the top. And if you're not in the panel arrangement, it doesn't matter. They will find a way of wording that contract to make it look like it's off panel. So they're not going to get in trouble. They'll find a way of doing it. Again, this isn't going to happen all the time, but it happens so often. It's incredible. And we're talking about some potentially monsters here. And to pick up on your point, yeah, there's no question of, on average, government takes longer because even if you've got all these relationships, you still have to go through a process. You still have to tick all the boxes.
And I think that's, Keith, that's absolutely true, because if you're on a panel, particularly a big all-of-government type panel, you will have quarterly catch-ups with the administrators and the procurement team of that panel. They don't buy your services. They're just making sure everything's running smoothly and you're adhering to it, and providing a good service and giving you feedback from those who buy your services. Yes, it's important to have a relationship with them, but that's why if you don't go the other end, you get gazumped by those that do. And it's out there in the market, and most people on this call will probably experienced it.
Yeah, just a couple of questions that come through, observations really. One from John. I like the way he's put it. Doesn't being on a panel give you the right to introduce yourself to the panelists? Absolutely. Yeah. I think it gives you more right. And as he says here, I know of a defence boutique consultant who's built a substantial business as a result of this. Absolutely. But to me, it's you've built that right probably with the procurement type level within the client. You've always got the right with everybody. The person right at the top of the entity doesn't necessarily care whether you're on the panel or not. The second one is again from an anonymous attendee. How do we keep the executives and money people happy during these times? Obviously, there's someone who I've worked with, and they made the point at the end of their statement saying, right now, this is a slow burning flame and we're planting seed and hoping for those seeds to grow over time. Absolutely right. But what I am seeing is a real increased reluctance, to be honest, in a world that was probably fairly reluctant anyway, for people just to go and build these relationships based on value with the clients they want to have, because they're in their mind there's no projects coming, and it's not about the project.
Yep, it's a long game. It's the long play. So following on from that, we thought we'd just run through some of the key considerations that many of our audience will be across, but given government's a hot buyer at the moment, doesn't hurt to have a refresher. So having respect for the probity of the government's procurement process. So probably the time to, yes, ask for some off-panel work is not while the actual RFT or P is actually on foot. But certainly, as Keith touched on, there's always a clause in there that says they reserve the right to take things off panel. And that can often be your best backdoor way in if you did miss out on a bid. So there's that when the bid's on foot.
Just adding a little bit on that probity of the process. I think one of the things I've noticed over the years is that people assume that it always says you can't talk to people during the bid. And if you read them carefully, sometimes it doesn't actually say that. And I've had a great number of successes over the years, even in government bids, where you can actually talk to decision makers and they haven't precluded you from doing it.
Yes.
You just have to make sure that it isn't written down there. And if it isn't, have the courage to then go and have that conversation, because you can provide value to something to them in the process that will help them make a better informed decision. And you have to be clear it's around that.
Yes. And often it's about helping educate them. Because often I think we've all probably seen RFPs that are quite poorly expressed, or the requirements are vague, and you think, oh dear, they're not sure what they want, they're confused. And that's where you can help educate them along the way, or through your response, your solution or service plan. So the second point there is just understanding, as you're preparing things, the need for solutions to be able to stand up to scrutiny. So really, given governments are subject to, taxpayer, political and media scrutiny, that's, being above board and having a well thought out plan that anything you're offering, if a journalist came across your bid under a freedom of information request or something like that, there wouldn't be anything dodgy in there. Conflict recognition and management has become very important, and there's a certain New South Wales government entity that's been in a bit of hot water the last few weeks over their process around identifying and even recording on the conflicts register that there may be a conflict of interest with certain gifts from certain providers. So with government, best practice is to be squeaky clean in that regard. And it's not that, say, with a law firm that there wouldn't be a conflict that emerges in the course of your work. That's quite normal. It's all about showing that you've got a robust process to actually manage a conflict appropriately and quickly to everyone's satisfaction should one arise. Confidentiality and data security, this is huge. It's been coming, the last 20 years, but particularly with some of the changes to laws in, say, Europe and global concerns and the increase in, cyber hacking, cyber risks. If you don't have your data security story straight and systems in place, that's a good thing to spend time getting ready, because it is just asked for now with every big consumer, government, financial institutions. So very important to have all of that in place. Transparency and accountability, again, getting back to the conflict stuff, the need for your offer to stand up to scrutiny, very important with the government clients, obviously. And the other thing that's really ramped up in the last probably 5 years is not just asking, do you have a policy on corporate social responsibility? We're seeing things now creeping into government and also large consumers, RFPs, things like show us your certification. Do you have a climate change statement? In Australia, show us a copy of your reconciliation action plan for Indigenous Australians. And that's got to be something solid and not just token. It's not just having some Indigenous art in the boardroom. They want to, as a big consumer, government is trying to get their supply chain to behave in ways they want to see. So that's an area that you can prepare almost before a bid comes out.
Yeah, and that's definitely a global trend right now, and it's more than just policies, like you say. It's how do you actually engage and how you building the workforce of the future, which is diverse and diverse background, and how you contribute in the community and what outreach work do you do, and that needs to be told by stories. And again, that going back to what we said earlier, that should be reflected in your website and your social media postings as well. It should be how you live and breathe, because otherwise it's just not believable.
Yeah, so hopefully your firm is enlightened and it's just the business behaviours and that's your brand and everyone's modelling that behaviour. Because again, we can't just pay lip service to this stuff and get away with that anymore in bids. They want hard evidence. And then a more practical tip on actually producing the bid. Most of the government tenders we see now at any level in Australia are quite restrictive and prescriptive in that, no more than 800 words on this, or in 150 words tell us that, which we will get into later in the webinar. But having some pre-prepared material to work from can really save you time here, because it'll often take 2 or 3 drafts to get your response on point and within the constraints. And the thing about being clever with them is sometimes you can sneak in things like a link to a profile of a professional if they haven't asked for CVs. However, I've noticed some bids now saying don't include any hyperlinks to material online. And then the other thing you're often able to do, as long as it's relevant to the bid, is attach supporting material. So where you comply in the short way in the body of your response, and then you attach, your policies or things like that to help support what you said.
On the previous one, just quickly, Amy, is because of the obvious, incredibly high profile global stories around the social and sustainable right now in Australia. I would put money that every single government tender at every level that's going out to market soon is going to have that as almost top of the list, because this fight between what was legally allowed in certain situations in the contract and what is morally right is going to disappear soon, and the moral will win.
Yes.
Yep, that's right. And if people are looking to do a little bit of research in this area, the Victorian state government in Australia, they have, I think it's called something like the Social Sustainable Procurement Policy Framework or Guidelines. That's available on the web, and that's quite a good one because it talks about what government is looking for in providers, and that can give you some clues as to what kind of policy positions that you'd need to shape and then promulgate throughout your firm, so you're on the front foot for some of this stuff.
Amy, can you send a link to that to Chloe, and we'll include that in the
Yes,
email.
we'll do that in our pack. Yeah.
And then moving on from that point, the last point was don't wait, and we'll move on to the next part, which is don't wait in preparing your bid. But before we get to that, don't wait for the RFP to come, as we've said before. And I think that links back to the question that was asked earlier. When I was at PwC, there's a program called Tanks on the Lawn. So if you wanted to win a big government opportunity or any opportunity, you would pre-position for that opportunity 2 or 3 years out. And that's where you then tie into the relationship. So when you're reporting back into those higher up, why are you spending this time for something that's coming in 3 months? You know it's because it's for this opportunity that's worth X amount of dollars in 3 years' time. So the reporting on your sales pipeline is easy for them to understand and what you're doing. And along the way, invariably you might get some success anyway, because there may be smaller pieces of work in your pre-positioning that may take you along there, which hopefully keeps them confident in a longer game.
And that links to a question that has been asked while we've been talking, which was, I get what you're talking about in this pre-positioning, but how do I persuade my bosses it's time well invested? And I think the issue there is that cultural one, and you almost within your organisation getting back to the absolute leadership of the firm to talk about what is our strategy as a business on this. And I'll be honest, if you can't get your ultimate leaders to agree that strategy is not to sit on your hands and wait for a bid to come out, you're going to just be fighting an uphill battle. I did a webinar that wasn't one of ours. It was for ICON the week before last, I think it was. And if you haven't seen that, go and look at it. It'll be on the ICON website, but I'm going to publish it as well soon. And it was one of the big law firms talking about their key client program and implementing a CRM and the amount of effort, money, and time they invested before they even pressed a button to get it right. And the leadership support they had to do it is a really good story of how these things, whether it's this or that, have to come from the top. I've got a number of anecdotes on government work in terms of laying the groundwork here, and I'm trying to think of one that's shortest but gives the bluntest message. And this was
I was just going to add that, you know, we're in a time of crisis now, and if people think back to other times of crisis, we had the Christchurch earthquakes. Work was won by people who actually offshore even put in bids ahead of time, unsolicited bids for pieces of work that were coming up, giving away IP to the government, who was sitting there going, we don't know how to cope with this. This is too hard. And they offered them a solution to fix those problems and those challenges, and they jumped at it. Because why wouldn't you?
That's
if you're sitting there waiting for the RFP, you know, they're waiting for the answers. And I think that kind of links into, you know, one of your stories, Keith, around the Queen.
I think the other issue on that, Ben, is that often, and don't take this wrong if there's people from government watching this, often they, like most months, they actually don't know what the solution is. So when they come to market with an RFP, to be honest, the RFP is probably missing the mark as well. We've seen this numerous times in the private and public sector. We all know it's out there. Much easier to influence it up front. And, you know, I can think of one engineering firm in Brisbane who did that around probably the biggest project in Australia. 3 years before it came to market. And guess what? They won the first 3 packages, I think. But the story that, again, this is Brisbane. I've got almost the same stories in the ACT and WA of this happening, where I was doing a panel session where there was someone from high level in government, Queensland state government, and 2 contracting companies on stage. And I was facilitating 40 engineers in the room, probably representing 30 firms. And they did the usual thing about it's all about price, it's all about price, it's all about price. And this very senior government official got angrier and angrier and angrier as this went on. And he said, the problem is you never come and talk to me outside of a bid. And this is, he actually said, you never come talk to me at all. You go and talk to my team. You never come and talk to me. And he then said something that was really, really profound, I thought. And it was, at the end of the day, we actually don't know what we're doing. And unless you come and help us figure that out, you are just going to be one of a panel of names, and you leave us with nothing else to go to other than price because you've not provided us anything else. And they all had another go at him saying it's all about price. He said, look, okay, I'll give you a hint. He said, there are only 2 things that matter in my world, or the 2 most important things that matter in my world. He said, A, I'm in government. And so the politicians behind me change their mind as the wind blows. So he said, what I actually want to do is I want to achieve things. I want to build things. I want to design things. I want to leave a legacy. The only way I can do that is if I action things very quickly before minds are changed. So he said, my number 1 criteria is the firm that gets back to me first will win. And some wise guy from the floor says, will you pay more for that? And he said, absolutely. He said, that's the first thing I need. I need that speedy response. But none of you know that because you've never asked a question, because you've never come and spoken to me. You're waiting for a bid. And he said, the second thing, he says, why is it all of you try and gold plate everything? I work in housing. I want fit for purpose. I don't want gold plated. Stop it. And he said, the trouble is you don't understand my world and you've never bothered to care. And so that for me, so that's broad in terms of relationships and public sector relationships. But in terms of the bid, the impact that has is profound. And one last closing thing here is, and some of you will have heard me say this before in terms of bids. If you want to win a client and it's too late to build this relationship outside the bid that is in front of you, because you know you're just going to be one of a mass low-balling, don't bid.
Yes.
Yeah, don't do it.
Bids have been done, and probably Keith's most stupid piece of advice, but it works. And that is, when the bid date is closed, write to them and say, or maybe right before the bid's closed, saying, we are not going to bid this, and give the reasons why not. But if you need any help when you have the bids, please, we are happy to spend half a day with you if you need any help identifying which of those bids is best fit for purpose. Probity doesn't matter, you're not bidding. And you're not bidding your job. You are not then going to go into this conversation and bid. You are there to help them make the right decision around this bid, but that positions you beautifully for the next one. Now you have got a relationship where you have proven that you are trustworthy. And the second thing that can happen in there is that can actually get you exposure to the senior people in government, not just procurement, because procurement don't know how to handle that email. So they pass it up the line. Okay, you're pushing for a client, not a project. Off you go.
We'll give you some more ideas on how to handle no bid later on, but
yes,
it's a really good one.
Yep, that's the quickest way to increase your win rate.
Yeah.
But obviously that's not always everyone's decision. Yes, we will get to that. So just quickly, we will talk a little bit more about the benefits of having a bid library, particularly in the time of COVID. But a rule of thumb that we like to work from is if you do have a fairly good bid library together, it should basically mean that you can get your baseline content, say 70% or 2/3 of the bid drafted and have a fairly solid first draft within a matter of days of the RFP or T hitting. And then that leaves you only 30% to really tailor to that client, that opportunity, that government department, that sector, that problem solving work that is what helps elevate bids from being ho-hum and one of a pack. Whereas Keith was saying, well, if on paper you all look the same, I'm going to choose on price because I can't tell. It's so important to do all of that tailoring for the opportunity. So
I think we're into another
poll
now.
number 2. So yes, we were curious to see if COVID had brought an uptick in your firm's enthusiasm for going after bids.
Okay, so I'll launch this. There's only two options: yes or no. No real change.
Yeah.
Oh, it's all sort of 50-50-ish.
Yeah, so there's still, I mean, it's sitting in sort of high 50s for yes, they want to win whatever they can.
Yeah.
And that could be coming out of, you know, desperation, drive from the top. There's still 43% saying no, much the same.
Yeah.
Okay, give another 5, 4,
And I think that's
3, 2, 1. And
there's an interesting point, having spent probably more recently than anyone else on this panel time in-house. There's kind of reluctance for those who are on the billable hour to give their time for these bids when they hope that their bid team or their BD resource can actually churn it all out for them. Of course, the flip side to that is if you really do want the work and you value your client and you're the one who's providing the clever smarts, you should really be involved and be in there, not just with the technical side of what you do, but giving the insight on what the client actually wants, because you're the one who should know that, because you interact with them. And the best BD team or bid team in the world can't write a good response if they don't know the intimacy of what the client wants, not just what's written on paper.
To really get under this, what would be really interesting, obviously we can't do it here, is each firm have to do it, is the people who have either of those attitudes, what was their attitude previously?
Yeah,
you know,
right.
because there'll definitely be a correlation between what their attitude to getting involved was before. And I can see potentially those who didn't want to get involved before, really didn't want to get involved before, saw that it was a marketing and a BD role, not theirs.
Yeah.
Getting even more excited, just issue more bids.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not my problem. Yeah. Yeah, that'd be really interesting.
And I think, it's going to vary, of course, depending who's feeling the cold wind blowing in terms of busyness, because, of course, in a boom economy, and I think we noticed this as well after the GFC, we had an uptick at JMA in inquiries for things like skills training and bid support, because actually winning work became mission critical to the health of their service business, and in a boom they didn't have to worry because they were getting approached, perhaps even knocking back work at times, and I think people are perhaps worried about, say March next year, what's going to happen. End of the year seems okay for a lot of sectors in Australia, but it's perhaps another 6 to 9 months time what a thing's going to look like. So yes, I've certainly noticed some of the clients I work with, people who've normally not wanted to participate in the bid process or have been tardy in providing their subject matter expert input, are suddenly my best friend, which is good. So
it is, but I actually suspect, based on conversations I've had with people, not in professional services, but let's just say they can see the balance sheet and P&L of various professional services firms. If you, not just with this subject, but probably particularly for this subject, if you can't get people on side now, because things are not going to get better in the next 6 months.
No.
And looking at the balance sheets and P&Ls of some professional services firms, but also some of your clients and potential clients, this focus on price is going to become rabid if you don't get ahead of it now. And if you can't get everyone in your firm to really understand what their role is in the relationship and pre-positioning, as well as the actual bids, now, trust me, it's going to be too late in 2 or 3 months' time, because some of your clients probably won't be around, and some of the firms almost certainly won't be around, sadly. And that's just how it is. Let's get this right.
Agreed.
Okay. All right. To help everyone, we thought we'd run through our top 5 tips to managing bids remotely and dig into that. So I think some of the audience will already be managing bids remotely, given they're part of global firms, or they've got geographically dispersed teams, even say within Australia or even within NZ or across Southeast Asia. So probably already had fairly good practices in place. And I think, all the clients and people I'm speaking with, no one's missed a bid deadline or anything like that. And thankfully, we're at a point in the world's history where a lot of things are paperless. It's very rare now, unlike say 10 years ago, where you'd have to have, 6 folios with the pricing in a separate envelope delivered hard copy into the tender box, downtown sort of a thing. So those days are gone. And
Although I did get asked, I got asked to respond with a CD-ROM to you about a year and a half ago.
Wow.
And we went back to them and said, do you really want a CD-ROM? And it turned out they wanted a PDF. They actually couldn't play a CD-ROM, but it was a legacy of the last time they'd gone out to a major RFP. So it goes back to that point of, questioning what it is, because I don't actually think you can play a CD anymore.
That's it. They don't have a drive for them, most laptops and PCs. So, and it just shows, in passing as an example of how cobbled together some of the RFPs you were going to be responding to are. And very often there's nothing sneaky or nefarious going on. It is really that they are just rushed, and they've rushed to market, and they haven't, had someone vet it for sense, 48 hours before they issue the documents. So, yes. So anyway, some of our top tips for managing a bid remotely. I think with most major bids, most of us would be working to some kind of a bid project plan, bid completion plan, etc. Whether that's something you do in an Excel document, or you use a tool like Slack or Microsoft Planner. Important element to add, I think, for bid teams who are more used to being able to get together around a table in a kind of a war room, is to factor in communication protocols, because a lot of people, depending where they're based, might be homeschooling children or looking after elderly parents, and their time is not as ample as it might have once been. So I think you can almost communicate too much sometimes, but as long as your set communication points as groups have purpose to them, and that might be a mini agenda that you run for bid check-in meetings, and you stick to that. That way the team can break and go about their tasks. So again, it's not as nice as being able to get together and look at a hard copy document together, but with a little bit of thought, the communications should go fairly smoothly.
One interesting point to add there is, I've noticed that if you're in a room, it's great because everyone can talk. If you're in a room with 2 people on a call, it's not so good. You're probably almost better to have everyone on a Zoom call, so everyone's got a place on the screen and they can all interact. That actually works a lot better than trying to do the hybrid where people get isolated. So I think do one or other.
Absolutely.
Yep. Second one, and we'll dig into this one, and it touches on what Ben's just mentioned, is about keeping up your bid team's morale. If you are in a situation where you're in a bigger organisation and you might have 3 to 4 to 10 on at any one time, you might have lost some team members through redundancies. And if the firm's mood is now this enthusiasm to just go for everything with no qualification, a lot of teams are going to be flogging themselves. So if you're running a bid team or part of a bid team, keeping up the morale is really important, because yes, they can be exhausting.
There was a lot of research done around, I think it was post GFC, on morale in firms, and almost singularly the most demotivating thing that people said that they had to do at work was getting involved in bids they knew they couldn't win.
Yes.
And I think that is going to be a massive, massive issue, especially if people are working and they've got things that are more fun and enjoyable or urgent or desperate to do. It's going to be really. And
that's where things, because everyone's being asked to do a lot more with maybe a lot less. Things like having a bid library or some template to use and work from and leverage can make them more efficient to put together, because again, no one wants to work on ones that are very speculative.
And there'll be people on this call and firms out there that are running a sort of 20 to 30% win rate. which
Mhm.
means you're losing 7 out of 10 that you bid for, which is pretty demoralising.
Yeah.
Speaking as a West Ham fan, Keith, not a Liverpool fan, that kind of gets you week in, week out, right? That kind of win ratio. No, so it will have an effect to psyche.
This sort of harks back, this having a clear protocol for key decisions and sign off. I know some of the clients I work with are very used to being able to pop down and see the managing director, managing partner, and getting, 3 quick decisions on something. That's not always possible at the moment, of course, and you may have enjoyed that type of access to decision makers. So again, as with the communication plan, just a bit more thought around approaching some of this stuff and counting back from your deadline, making sure that you've got all that sorted and it's not the night before and we're panicking about pricing or something like that, because you've probably done all the pre-positioning work, hopefully.
And that's a really interesting point, Amy. I've lost count the number of times that people try and, I think it's put off pricing, but say, oh, it's just a number, we can drop it in at the end. So it doesn't,
Yeah.
the actual putting it in the document is easy, obviously. It is numbers or a table, or 3 options or whatever it is, but the thought behind it is critical.
Yep. And again, that's got to be part of your pre-positioning strategy.
Absolutely.
What is our cost of production? And we'll talk about pricing in a bit more depth a little later. Another practical thing to do if you're managing bids remotely, and I think we're probably all at the point where we've got things like Microsoft Teams or Zoom established, but get on top of the tech to do with the documents. Make sure that you've got controls on access to certain things, say like pricing, if certain team members don't need to see that, and be crystal clear about who's looking at what version and where the draft is up to, which is where a good bid communication plan can also help, because you get into a muddle with assumptions where 2 people have progressed the same document and now you've got 3 versions of it or something like that, and you just want to head off anything like that. Especially when it's, the final week. And again, with the bid library, it's sounding like a lot of people are not quite on the bidding front, but certainly back in March, April, when COVID first reared its head, things had died down a bit. We'd noticed some bids that were anticipated had been delayed or deferred. And that was a good opportunity to perhaps either update or look at even creating a bid content library for your firm, so that you can do some of these bids a little bit more efficiently. It won't write, it's not a set and forget and dump, but it will, as we said, take you to maybe 65, 70% complete, and then you can get that subject matter input from the key senior professionals.
Really key point, not to wait again, as we keep reiterating.
Stop.
We're certainly seeing over here, that idea that we've got an election, things are slowing down, the RFPs aren't there, but they're probably all going to come, and we know they're probably going to come in about 2 months' time.
Yeah.
So that's going to put a lot of strain on any firm if you're going to respond to 2, 3, or a heck of a lot more than that. If you haven't done the work now, you'll be regretting it. So don't have those regrets. Get stuck in now and build that library.
That's right. And I think every year with procurement, there becomes a craziness in the countries where Christmas is a thing, or the summer holidays for us in Down Under. It's got to be before Christmas. So there may be a massive flurry in NZ post-election, but pre-summer holidays. So get ready now.
Didn't want to see the kids anyway.
Yep. And we figured there'd be a lot of bid professionals or marketing and BD people that have to get involved in bids. So we thought it was just worth calling out again about keeping your bid team engaged, keeping the morale up. So quick recap again with the communication, being a bit more thoughtful, being respectful, and building maybe some extra buffer time into deadlines, because yes, you can't just pop down the hall to see, Lee. Lee might be at home with children or something like that, or on back-to-back Zoom calls. Thus, a little bit of courtesy and just over allowing times for reviews, if you've got several people contributing to the bid, can be helpful. As Ben was saying, video, if you can't meet face-to-face, is kind of nicer. And I think certainly in Australia, in Melbourne, some of the clients and colleagues I have based out of there are almost losing their minds because they've had, quite a hard second lockdown. So where it is safe to maybe get together even a couple of days a week, I would recommend people try to do that, because you can get further faster in person with some of the decisions and other material that needs to be developed. But yeah, video rather than just phone. But you can supplement that with WhatsApp chats, text messages. I like to send my team funny things. And it's important that you, if you are a manager looking after a bid team, that you emphasize you're not micromanaging them. It really is a welfare kind of check. Because again, bid professionals do tend to flog themselves. And if you've got back-to-back rolling deadlines, it can feel really relentless. And it is important to, keep up the morale and also take a break and celebrate some of the submissions that you've gotten in, and hopefully you'll be hearing about some wins too, as this is all happening.
And celebrate when you've achieved and finished a section and all those kind of good things within your team. I think now is a good time to lead into the next section, and we'd like to hear a little bit more from you. So we've got another poll that we're going to like to run. So I'm going to get Keith to do the jokes behind it. We want to know, has your bid no bid qualification process been abandoned since COVID-19? So you're no longer doing it and just assuming you're going to go for everything? Again, a simple yes, no.
So we got 4 answers as options here. We probably didn't have a qualification process beforehand. We probably let it go a bit lax since. Not much has changed, or actually we've been much stronger than we used to be in terms of diligence. Okay.
Interesting.
That is interesting. And the interesting thing, so what's coming up is that over half the people are saying that much the same as pre-pandemic. I would suspect, based on the clients I'm talking to, that's partly, some had great processes in place beforehand, some had not necessarily very good process. We've got 16% here are saying they didn't have a process anyway. So I'll share the results. I think the other thing is that these bids haven't hit the ground yet. The RFPs haven't hit the ground yet. So it's going to be really interesting to see whether people are able to maintain that diligence.
I think, so to just picking up on the first, the 16% who don't have a qualification process, I'd urge that you do.
Yes.
Even if you somewhat ignore it and crazily go ahead, the reality is, and you'll find ones on the JMA website or my website, and they're all pretty similar. You can get these stuff for free. Is it actually shows you the areas that you're weak in your bid response. If you are going to go ahead, you can actually address them during the process to get your bid response stronger. So even if you're crazy and ignore the fact it says you've got no chance, you can at least use that as a tool to inform what you do next.
Yes.
Otherwise, you're just going in a little bit blind, and that would be a concern for me.
Yep.
The other thing that I think would be really interesting, and Amy, I don't know if you've seen this, but I think for anyone who's kind of responsible for their bid processes in your firms who's on this call, it would be really useful if you actually had some benchmarks that you tracked in terms of the dynamics of bids we're going for, the dynamics of those we're not, how they're changing probably weekly at some point, maybe monthly, but also your success rate tracked live. Because if you can start to see that you're going for more bids, but your success rate is diminishing, that gives you some hard evidence to take. And we all know that our bosses in professional services like empirical evidence.
Yeah,
correct.
And say, we need to stop this now, rather than as we saw post 2012 when the mine shut down, where firms just didn't seem to have that data, so they were just bidding. Have some empirical data that you can track live.
We did that for a while at ACOM New Zealand before we left, and it was, you could tell if you had a go-get score of 65% or above, you pretty much won. If it was lower, you didn't. It didn't lie.
Yeah.
So there's a real value in doing that and seeing what investment of firm time you're going to put in losing. Do you want to keep going?
That's it. And I think almost, well, over 20% are saying that their process is stronger than ever, which is good because perhaps some of them are being strategic. We've got less resources maybe to work with. We can't go for everything. We need to be very careful with what, we invest in. But yeah, having the data on previous decisions, and then possibly even things like debrief information that you got from a client if you're unsuccessful, having all of that collated and collected can show, hey, maybe we shouldn't keep bidding this service to the construction sector because we've done 4 in the last 12 months and none of them have won. And that can be quite powerful because, as we all know, a lot of the top brass get very het up when there's a decision to be made about going for a bid. And they think, oh, we'll just throw a hat in the ring, not understanding all of the direct and indirect costs. So
just before I forget, John, who often comes up with really good tips, going back to your commentary around keeping a team motivated, Amy, says lockdown tip. Have an open Zoom call that people in your team can drop into whenever they'd like.
That's a great idea.
It's like having an open door in your office for your team.
Yep.
Rather than feeling as though I've got to call them and hope they're available. I like that. Thank you,
And
John.
then you can, and then you can do like a virtual coffee. I know some of my clients, they've shouted everyone an Uber Eats voucher so they can all get a takeaway and have that and have maybe, not too many drinks, but do those sorts of socially fun activities, but in a socially distanced, acceptable way.
Excellent.
Very good. Okay. All right. Responding to a bid when you have little chance of winning.
Yes. Always fun.
Yes.
So I think the first thing to do if you are going to no-go a bid is make that decision early. So no client wants to receive a letter or communication from you 3 hours before deadline that you're not participating. They may have procurement rules, they may want you to offer it to someone else. So if you can make a decision, do it early. And when you make a decision, that's when the real work starts. So yes, you've got to write, you may have to explain in a formal letter or email the reasons why. And they can't be, we're not replying because it's going to cost us a lot of money and we don't think we're going to win.
Yep.
It has to be more than that. If you haven't spent the time getting to know them and you don't feel you know the organisation well enough, I think you can actually be honest and upfront and say, look, hey, we just don't know that. This caught us on the hop. We haven't done our due diligence. We're not in a good position. We won't be able to give you the service you require, but we'd love to learn more about you in the more suitable time so we can position for the next one. That's quite true. You can only do that once because if you do it every time, it's going to be a little bit weird. And going to something that Keith said earlier, I think you can decline and offer them something else. So yes, you can review bids, but the other one that works really well is say, look, hey, we were going to invest 8 hours of our subject matter experts' time per day in this, so that we'd rather use that time valuably and actually give you a workshop, a kickoff session. So outside of this, we'll come in and share our IP with you to get your project running successfully. Most clients won't turn that down. Even if they do, they're going to think it's a really good place to be because you thought about them. You're willing to give them something for free that's valuable to them.
Yeah.
Can I just overlay a couple of things on this one? Because this is clearly a bugbear of mine. And it goes to a conversation I had once with someone who ran the office in a city in Australia. I've got to be careful. For a large engineering firm. And they
get yourself in trouble, Keith.
Yeah, no. They came to me at the end of the program. They said, Keith, I know what you're going to tell me, but I want to get your thoughts on this. We're going for a bid that we know we can't win. I just want your thoughts. What do you think we should do? And it was kind of, really? I said, well, you don't go for it. They said, yeah, but it's really big.
Yeah.
I said, well, but that's the problem, isn't it? If it's really big, you're going to invest even more time in losing it. Yeah, we know that, but it's really big. Yeah, but you're going to lose lots of money. Yeah, we know that. I said, okay, how do we take this? I know where I'll take this conversation. And his next line was, but we've got mouths to feed and bills to pay. And I said, losing money doesn't pay the bills. And again, that's the lack of commercial nous in a lot of people. I said, okay, let's imagine all the competition died. Everyone else died. So you're the only person left standing and you had to win the job. So you win the job. What margin are you making? Negative.
Whoa.
So they knew that they were bidding to lose money.
Yeah.
And it would have been a lot of money. This was a monster project. So we have to, some of you on this call who will know exactly what I'm talking about and believe it and get it, you have to have a way of having that commercial dialogue with the bosses. And all you have to do nowadays, I think, is point them to some of the contracting firms. Look at New Zealand, look at the UK, some of the law firms, look at Europe 3 years ago. And point them at the papers on what brought those firms down.
Yeah, I mean, look at Carillion as an example in the UK. It's a great, yeah. You just Google Carillion, you'll get the example.
In New Zealand.
Yeah.
Look at Fletcher's. Yeah, and here the CEO came out and admitted they'd been chasing the really big, exciting projects without any diligence on the financial aspects of it. I mean, obviously that's not the only thing, but point your leaders to those stories. You'll still get defensive commentary, but you've got to stop it.
And I think
we've got about another 5 minutes of maybe 8 minutes of presentation for us.
Okay.
Okay. I was just going to say on that little chance of winning, lots of people do it formally. Sometimes just pick up the phone and chat to the client and explain why.
Yeah.
Yep.
Much
I think as we're saying earlier,
touch.
yep. And as we were saying earlier, sometimes this is an opportunity to better educate clients about what you actually do. They may have you pigeonholed. And I would say if you do have to do one for political reasons with the client, again, have templates, have a big library, just get out of it as cheaply as possible.
Yeah.
And get it off the desk.
So yes, a lot of people believe that people are buying on price, and there's stories going around the market that competitors are going at 50% under, and I wonder, put yourself in the client's shoes. If you're buying something of any value, would you really put your trust in something that cheap?
Mm-hmm.
And if that client is the sort of person that would put their trust in that value that cheap, would you actually want them as a client? And they're two questions, and it harks back a little bit to Colin Jasper's excellent session that we had at the start of this series. You know, when he talked about the studies actually show it's things around about 4% buy on price, particularly when they see value. So if you're providing a service, something that's really important to the client, they're not going to buy on price. So just doing that, the feedback often is that, because it's easy to give that. And if you do that as a purchaser, it will drive the price back. I mean, more people will ask in the current climate because it's a great opportunity to ask, because we're in a recession, so people will naturally pull those levers. And there was, a few years ago, back in the UK at the last GFC, there was a big, how am I going to say this? Massive organization that brought every single one of their suppliers in and just said, look, you give us a 20% discount or you're out. Lawyers, accountants, a lot. But actually the trick to that, because it was very procurement led, was actually to come back and say, look, we still want to work with you. We don't want to trigger an RFP, but we can have to meet you somewhere in the middle.
Yep. And I've been in those situations as well, Ben, with clients where there's nowhere to elaborate or tell more of a story or qualifications around pricing or including assumptions. It's, we want a number in a box and we expect a minimum discount of X%.
Yes.
And then some of the providers I've worked with on bids, they haven't put their rates up each year on the anniversary of the contract, and they're looking to put them up $50 an hour or something. So yeah, it's about, again, educating, trying to have those conversations where possible and meeting the client halfway, because like we were saying, a lot of the RFP requests are poorly designed. They're procurement driven, and procurement is often out, with the greatest respect to them, to make a name to say that we've driven price down. And those procurement people are possibly not going to be there in 6 months. But if it's an ongoing panel appointment, you might be stuck with that pricing locked in for the first 3 years of a 5-year appointment or something. So you have to think very carefully about all of that stuff, because what will happen if you do win it at any price, your best professionals won't want to work on that client. They'll get the C team, or fees will ramp up because
if anyone's ever worked with a team to try and raise the price, it takes about 3 years and a lot of pain, and it's very hard. The easiest thing is to discount. The hardest thing is to raise the price when you're in a client, because they're used to paying a certain amount.
Yeah. Another technique you could look at including as part of your proposal or tender response might not be alternative fee arrangements, but alternative billing arrangements. So if a client is feeling some pain and has a cash flow issue or something like that, you could look at different billing and invoicing structures to defer payments or make some payments contingent on a successful outcome. So all the value pricing type ideas there. They're a bit trickier to have up and running, but even by just proposing and formulating some of those in your bid, you look better than the competition because you've given them more choice.
Okay, and I think that's a really good point to close out on. If we can just, before we go to open forum, I think we'll just click into the last poll now, mindful of everyone's time here. Really want to get your thoughts and feedbacks on this last one here. So if we can. What are your 3 biggest bid challenges since COVID-19? And there's a range of responses.
So if you can just answer to click 3 of these options, that would be great. Any 3.
Awesome.
Or 1 if you want to do 1, just don't do more than 3, please.
It's always a list of 3, Keith. I remember that.
We're emerging with a couple of leaders, which is expected RFTs, fees delayed or deferred.
Yeah.
It's kind of external. But to me, that's a massive opportunity to go and build these relationships. Always on top of the key. And not winning enough bids. And that, I think, comes down partly, again, to the necessity to have stats that you can take. So just give it another 3 or 4 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Stop. Okay.
Yep.
Very interesting. The lowest score in there is winning, but on poor commercial terms, which suggests that people aren't too worried about pricing, perhaps, or maybe they think they're going to.
Well, again, I think there's a timing. It might be because there haven't been a big issue yet.
Yeah, they haven't been under the pressure to discount yet.
I think yes, the delay is a real good opportunity. But it's interesting that no strategy on bid decisions. It looks like there's a little bit of work to be done there as well about what people are going to go for and what they're going to pick, which relates to pre-positioning and those key client programs and all that good stuff we've talked through so far.
Yeah, so I would be really interested. We can't do it now, obviously, but if anyone on the call or watching the video is interested in communicating back to any of the 3 of us, actually, what are you doing to track the way your win rates are going? Because I'd be really interested to see, not so much the results of that, that's for your business, obviously, the stats are interesting, but I'd love to know what you're actually doing to actually track and share live, ongoing bid results. Accepting the fact that a lot of bids will be going out the back door, and so you can't actually track those stats.
Awesome.
Okay.
Are we now got time to? Are there any questions we can move to?
No questions sitting in the box. Have you got any from the those that were submitted in advance? Otherwise, I'll throw in a couple of I guess observations while you're looking at those.
I think that I remember one from advance, which was how do you differentiate a law firm? Always a fun one. And I think it's true of most firms, right? And the answer is it isn't in saying you've got the best people, the best team, and you're in 14 locations. You differentiate it by the strength of your relationship, because the technical expertise or the size of your firm is not something they can tell. So you need to understand more intimately what the client's after, and then share relevant examples of where you've done it before. And the successful outcome that client had from that where you did it. That needs to be upfront.
And I think, building on that, then if you, as a rule of thumb or a way to frame approaching positive differentiators, because even in 2020, so many firms I see start their bids with, thank you for this opportunity,
Yes.
and we are a very old firm, and we are good quality, and we do absolutely every service under the sun, and we're everywhere. Those attributes or features of your services and, what your firm is, if it's been going 100 years, that's great. Those things only matter in the bid if they help the client get what they want. What is the problem the client needs to solve? And how the fact that you've got longevity, that might be relevant. If not, put it at the back. Some of the evaluators will be like, tick, that's great. They've been around 100 years. That's important to me. Others won't care. But what you want to show to stand out on paper is what your services or team or your approach or your little bit of technology, how they're going to get the client the result, the solution, what they want.
I have a live question. I'm conscious we haven't got long to answer it. And then I got one last thing I want to say at the end. From Claire, we have a big content library, but it wouldn't get us to 60 to 70% of the bid, perhaps because our bids often require tailored methodologies to our clients' need project. Does your 60 to 70% include standardized methodologies where they can be standardized?
Yes, I'm gathering this might be an engineering firm type question. So obviously those bids are more complex if they're asking for, preliminary design or project methodologies. To keep the bid library simple, I would have all of your good ones at least in one place. And then hopefully a template that is quick to adapt from. Bid libraries, again, it is a bit of a rule of thumb that it would take you to 60%. And if it's a detailed solution, you probably do need to put in quite a lot of original work for a one-off infrastructure project versus, say, a panel appointment to provide audit services or something, which is a more repeatable, standardized, almost commoditized stream of work. So for the one-off, one firm is going to win the project. That probably does need heavily, to be more 70% tailored rather than 30% bid library developed, if that makes sense.
Okay.
And I think a shout out to your graphic designers, because a lot of good design on processes and flow diagrams can actually speed up the process, even though they have to be adapted. The fact that they're there takes the thought away, and you can just make it relevant to that project.
Okay, last suggestion, which some of you will hopefully find amusing, but actually it's got there's value to it. One of the ways you can change the appetite for bidding blind is the next time a partner, or if you're an engineering firm, a director comes to you and said, we really should bid this, have a policy that they have to put $100 out of their wallet into a pot. And they only get it. They only get it back. I know you a firm years ago who actually did this. They only get it back if you win. It changes the thinking, and this is an absolutely true event. Sitting in a room with 30 odd partners in a very large consulting firm, I said to them, the problem is you don't treat this firm as though it's your own. And one of them went absolutely nuts at me, and that firm may well be on the call. One of them went absolutely nuts at me and said, you obviously don't understand what we're like. We're a partnership. This is our firm. We all own this firm. Exactly how we behave. And all I had to say back to him was, okay, every time you make a yes, go decision on bidding, would you make that same decision if it was your own money that you were going to put into bidding it? And his response was, well, no, that's different. No, it's not. No. And so, get people to think like that when they make these go, no-go decisions. I'm conscious it's 10:29.
Yeah.
If you do have any other further questions, thoughts, anything, please just flick them in an email to me, Amy, or Ben. We will, as always, send out the recording to this probably in the next 48 to 72 hours with any of the links that we talked about on this call. Thank you very much to Amy and Ben. Some great feedback. And thanks everyone for attending. And I hope to see some, if not all of you, in a couple of weeks when Catherine will be on here talking about social media.
Yes.
So thank you very much, one and all. Have a great day, evening, night, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.